Chapter 3. I love you. You are not the evil you carry. You are the fruit of a chaotic heritage bruised by centuries of suffering. You were born to fulfill yourselves, to cleanse the karma of your ancestors and reveal the light of all this darkness. You are love. You are light. Some books are written by the hands of God. Some books are written by the hand of God or by that supernatural force that makes things extraordinary and divine. Some books shine because they are there to guide the beings who read them toward the path of light. So, without understanding why, you feel drawn to one book and not another, and without knowing it, this book will change the course of your destiny. Some books are therapeutic. When you finish reading the last page, something inside you has changed, a consciousness has grown, memories have returned and generated emotions, rekindling the imagination. Some books turn our lives upside down, and after reading them, our vision of reality changes irreversibly. We dare to imagine the impossible, and everything becomes a slow dance on the way to our fulfillment. We seek to know who we really are, no longer wishing to live in the illusion of an unconscious program linked to our upbringing. We close the book, and it's as if a new chapter in our lives has begun. I hope this book has that effect on you, because that's why I'm letting my fingers run across the keyboard. I know it's not me who's writing, even if my story has inspired me. I know at this moment when I'm writing these lines that I'm guided by a mission far greater than writing a book. I know in my heart that some people will close the last page, moved, because I've managed to touch their hearts and rekindle the flame of their forgotten dreams. Part 1. The individuation process. Individual freedom is a total paradox because we feel the need to escape through something external that gets us hooked. Games, love, sport, work, religion, television, everything reminds us that we're alive and kicking. It's something that both thrills and distracts us from reality, a feeling of existing for something or someone, a vice that can strangely rob us of all freedom, an addiction without which we feel like dying. Why do we fight for rights and freedoms when we ourselves create our own alienation? Who hasn't sacrificed himself for giving up his pleasures for patriotism, or the love of his children, or to feed his family? Who has never been a victim of society, its laws, its injustices, its regulations, its shortcomings? Who hasn't suffered from all the wars we wage against ourselves and others? Who hasn't felt trapped in a situation, whether intentional or not, in a sort of endless tunnel from which there seems to be no way out? These are just some of the reasons why we feel this insatiable need for an escape route to help us forget the wonderfully harsh reality of life. We've always been told that life is a struggle and that we have to fight our way through every day. We are told that the future belongs to those who get up early and that you don't get something for nothing and so on. We're conditioned to work hard, to slog it out, as the old-timers put it. But nobody tells us about the personal, introspective work in which we must invest our whole being if we really want to taste happiness. It's a full-time unpaid job, so few people devote time to it, and yet it's the most profitable since its fruits have no value. Happiness is worth far more than the best salary, and there's no social recognition to match it. Happiness is a light that sparkles like a diamond or gold. Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "It's not a sign of good mental health to be integrated into a sick society." So that's why societal reality is so wonderfully hard, because if we question it, it leads to existential reflection and a personal quest. And if we learn to cultivate the happiness and light that accompanies this questioning, then we surrender to the divine. Fears, anxiety, stress, etc. linked to competition and societal success disappear to make way for guidance that takes place at a much higher invisible frequency level. When consciousness transforms us individually, we then understand that the world can also change on a global and planetary scale, but that this depends first on our inner world. Consciousness enables us to apply what Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Do you believe this? Have you ever wondered what we all need to escape the reality of life? Some people will say, I'm happy, I'm healthy, I've got a job, a house, a car, a wife or husband who loves me, lovely children, I'm fine. Meanwhile, children are dying of hunger every minute in third world countries. What do we see on the news every day? Wars, attacks, crime, violence, famine, disease, murder, rape, tsunamis and so on. How many images of hope? What do most people do after work? They go to the toilet, eat something, talk to their partner, ask their children if they got good marks at school and turn on the TV. For many, it's an outlet, a drug. People need to watch it to stay informed, and it makes them feel part of society. They are both actors and spectators, but strangely enough, they don't realize that they don't exist for themselves, but rather for this society that imposes rules and deprives us of freedoms. The corporate state, a concrete jungle, is a veritable matrix, an iron system. There's no escaping it. It governs us, it directs us, it monitors us, it tracks us. It computerizes us, it counts us, it names us, it labels us, it shapes us, it creates us in its own image, it programs us, it formats us. The societal system will have us believe that we are free to be who we are, but this is false, an illusion, a lie to ourselves and to others, a mask, a comedy. If we think about it, we are what society wants us to be, from education to school, from our parents to our family, right up to our banker. We're denied access to our true selves. We play roles in order to fit in and appear normal. Understanding who we really are and seeing clearly is not easy, because socialization blinds and molds us. How can we find the path to our own happiness? How can we get off the beaten track? How can we make tomorrow a better day when the present is corrupted and the image we have of ourselves is not our own? Analyzing ourselves, questioning our beliefs, and understanding our dark side are the only way to find out who we really are. The image we have of ourselves is merely an appearance that enables us to fit into the mold, to fit in, to be accepted. Carl Jung calls this the persona, the person who wears a mask. And by individuation, he means shedding the masks of the false ego. Strangely enough, individualism is what society pushes us to apply every day, making us be the best, thinking only of ourselves in order to rise to the top. We have to be a winner in the eyes of others. But what about accepting ourselves and our own achievements? If we think about it, we give the best of ourselves, But deep down, is that best really who we are? The best in the eyes of society, of course, but deep down, deep inside, is it who we really are? Or is it one of those roles we assign ourselves throughout our lives? Boys often say to themselves from an early age, "When I grow up, I'm going to be a captain, a policeman, a fireman, a doctor." And without making any generalizations, girls often want to be veterinarians. Have you ever noticed that from an early age, we want to be heroes in the eyes of society? We already want to be admired, recognized, and useful. We want to save the world in some way, to be Superman or Superwoman. Then there are those who say to themselves, "I'm going to be a doctor like Dad, or a lawyer like Mom." Don't you think you are what your parents wanted you to be? Or on the contrary, do you think you are what you unconsciously refuse to be because you can't deny your roots? We're aware that we often find it hard to accept the duality of our body and soul. We perceive this disunity as a tragedy and blame ourselves for it. Out of an average of 15 years spent together with our parents, how many remain scarred? This is the concept of epigenetics. In other words, changing your environment to modify your genetic signature. Your genes are inside you, in your veins, in your blood, in your history, in our societies and cultures, with the collective unconscious that Carl Jung talks about. From generation to generation, for centuries, nothing changes because we remain rooted in our old ideas. We are not aware that they exist because they are inside us. They are part of who we are. They are our beliefs. We inherit them. So we think we exist on the basis of the ideas we have of our beliefs. We accumulate ways of reasoning, of thinking. We follow rules, patterns we've been taught, and we form our person according to all these conventions, all these pacts and agreements we make with others. We hold back our own evolution because throughout our lives we keep making agreements with society. In life, having children and a job is rewarding. In life, you can't shout. In life, you mustn't show your emotions. Men don't cry, and so on. We act according to all these pacts we've agreed to. In this way, we restrain ourselves from being different from who we really are, our true and profound personality, the truthfulness of our character. We have to free ourselves from all these agreements if we want to live free and happy. This is explained in the book The Fifth Toltec Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, author of the best-selling The Four Toltec Agreements. Be yourself, be your life. Dare to break the chains that imprison you and let go of your shadow by becoming who you really are. Once the chain of all these agreements has been broken, we arrive at the last judgment, our liberation from judgment of ourselves and others. You are living in an illusion, just like the prisoners in Plato's allegory of the cave. For those unfamiliar with this philosophical tale, here's a summary. Prisoners chained in the darkness of a cellar took for real the shadows of objects cast by the lights outside, until one day a slave broke his chains and left the darkness of his ignorance. At first he was so dazzled that he could see nothing, until he discovered the deception in which they all lived. He returned to the cave to inform the others, who killed him, for he alone had seen the truth. The same kind of reference can be found in Buddhism, comparing the drunken crowd with you, the only one who sees clearly because you haven't been drinking. The past is tomorrow's history. If nothing changes, it's because not enough of us are making individual changes. We are content to reproduce, to obey, whether or not we are aware that this is not necessarily the right path, but we follow it. We follow our fellows because we are afraid of being left alone and abandoned by our siblings. We'd rather be a sheep following a lost flock than Mr. Suggins' goats, lost and alone on the right path. It's by delving into ourselves, into our depth, that we discover the archetype of conformity. According to etymology, person comes from the Latin persona, itself derived from the verb personare, which refers to the mask worn by stage actors in the past. Personare therefore means to speak through. The mask represents the part of the personality that organizes the individual's relationship with society. It's the way in which each individual must blend into a predefined persona in order to play a social role. The persona's function is to hide our real self from the outside world, to appear different from who we really are. It's a kind of interface that everyone uses to avoid showing their ego. It's an archetype that's necessary in society and stored in our consciousness, because if everyone did as they pleased, life would be impossible. But thanks to persona, even though consciousness controls it, it acts on the unconscious. Persona is the element of our personality that manifests itself when we face problems of adaptation and convenience. For example, you do everything to make your boss proud of you, but you don't enjoy it. You're going against who you really are, and the persona you're expressing leaves you with negative traits, because they fundamentally contradict who you really are. We want to do this, but we are doing that, and reinforcing our shadow side and amplifying the cognitive dissonance we're experiencing. The shadow side is the part of our personality that we don't see. This persona, as Carl Jung calls it, is the mask we put on with our best mind when our boss asks us to work overtime. In the story, we forget ourselves completely. Our one and only aim is to please someone other than ourselves. It's our way of integrating ourselves into our work and society. We get up in the morning and don't like our hair, our bodies, or our image, but we don't care because we have a job that allows us to put petrol in our beautiful car. We live in the illusion of our mask. Losing ourselves helps us to find ourselves, and that's why following the masses often takes us away from the most important thing of all, ourselves, our truth, our personal legend. In the end, we forget ourselves just to avoid being forgotten by others. As a rule, we act and are like the model of our parents, teachers, and society have shown us. We are often what others want us to be, and people try to put in their place those who deviate from the path of normalcy. Why are you doing this? You should. If I were you, I would not, and so on. The influence can be so strong when it comes to those closest to us, family, friends, etc. School makes us fit into a mold. It forms us to be legal in the eyes of the law and the equal of our fellow human beings, so that we can be integrated into society. It encourages us to be the best, to win and never to lose. It makes us believe that what's important is the result, when in fact it's not. What's most valuable is the road we travel. The power of love and life teaches us much more. Every defeat is a victory over ourselves. Every door that closes opens another, and often the next one provides an even greater opportunity for self-discovery. The system makes us believe that we can succeed through it, but it's a lie. Very often it crushes us. We are just pawns, and it's our playground. On it we move forward, and every square is a victory. But when it decides to move us backwards, we lose, the cards fall, and we believe all is lost. Paradoxically, this defeat is necessary for our victory to be born. Simply put, there are no failures, only experiences. If we were always in victory, what would be the point of questioning ourselves? To better triumph life, we need to know how to accept defeat. A negative experience helps us to get back on our feet, but on the other hand, it can also sink us into such despair that it's hard to get up again. We can't see the end of the long, dark tunnel, and even imagining a light in it is impossible. The problem with the system is that it focuses on the result, when the most important thing is the journey we've made, the lessons we've learned. What happens when a defeat so crushes us that we have no hope, no will to live? Hope sustains us, but then all hell breaks loose and we descend into internal chaos. We become dependent on the system that takes us in hand and decides to help us with miracle pills reimbursed by Social Security. Cold drugs, antidepressants, neuroleptics, sleeping pills, etc. These chemical molecules prevent us from thinking and help us sleep, and without even realizing it, we become addicted. The system controls us and takes our destiny into its own hands. That's what the system wants us to be, puppets who act but don't think, because the second most profitable industry for the state is pharmaceuticals. The day we enter the endless black tunnel of depression is normally the start of a great deal of self-examination and self-questioning. We don't understand what's happening to us. Everything seems unfair, unjust, hopeless. But why me? What would happen if we started to think about the meaning of life, its purpose, its values, its principles? Society is supposed to inculcate in us values of fraternity, equality, and freedom. But paradoxically, if we think about it, society pushes us in the opposite direction. It separates us. If we don't rebel against ourselves, we become its slaves. It pushes us to social recognition, to be valued by our fellow human beings. But this is a total paradox, because we don't need to be in the front rank to be recognized. The simple fact of being human and belonging to the same species should be enough to make us realize that we are all life and blood brothers belonging to the same world. We all come from the same divine creation and inhabit the same planet. But instead of this union and fusion, we separate from each other to compete and be the best. And since our self-esteem is low, when one of our fellow human beings shines brighter than we do, envy and jealousy, real emotional poisons, take over. As these negative, toxic emotions emerge, the feeling of respect and love for our fellow man disappears. By asking us to be the best, the societal system influences us to compare ourselves with others. This is how we lose our caring values. If we succeed in being the best, a feeling of domination takes hold of us and we end up believing ourselves to be superior. Of course, we are all different. It's impossible to find two genetically identical people. But in the end, we are all the same, with our fears, our uncertainties, our unanswered questions, our doubts, our anxieties, our questioning. Every human being is good and no one is born bad, but the societal system perverts us by forcing us to compete. With all its wars, bloodshed, and promises of a better future, society turns us into soldiers, and fear develops our survival instinct like animals, except that we have speech. Speech is the most destructive weapon in existence because we often misuse it. There can be no action without words. It is the materialization of thought. But paradoxically, humans are also the only species capable of caging, humiliating, crushing, and killing their fellow creatures for no real survival instinct. We are born in the name of ideas and beliefs. Religious wars, civil wars, gang wars, blood wars, color wars and race wars. Society turns us into pretentiously egotistical monsters, and questioning ourselves has become almost impossible. We refuse to see our dark side and our involvement in this sordid spectacle. We continue to let the world do its thing, with all its injustice and violence all around us. We are spectators of all this barbarity, and the system gives us the illusion of being safe. But in reality, we are participating in the extinction and crushing of others. Part 2. Unity and Entity. In Buddhism, entity represents the absolute and ultimate truth. It is so. It is known once spiritual awakening has reached its peak and the being is able to surpass all notions of matter and form and understands that everything is energy and cyclical. Anyone who attains omniscience is rewarded with transcendent wisdom. It is liberation from all causes of suffering and frustration. The notion of entity is inseparable from the notion of impermanence. I'll explain the impermanence of entity of the whole in more detail in the following section. Understanding the notions of unity and entity is important to our spiritual awakening and therefore to our personal realization. Spiritual awakening means putting an end to the cycle of suffering and filling our hearts with compassion for all those who have not yet been liberated from the mind and the unconscious, repetitive, and negative thoughts that dominate it. When we understand that we are part of a universal whole, we understand that we are all connected. We are links in a cosmic chain, but for the moment we are detached from who we are, from the chain, and therefore from everything else. We don't perceive our individual influence on global well-being. Liberating ourselves individually is the missing link in the chain that keeps us all separate from one another. When each individual undertakes his or her own ascension, ascension takes place globally and naturally. For the moment, very few people are making this quantum leap, this awareness, this paradigm shift, this change of reality, of life, of the inner world. Unfortunately, the outside world is merely a reflection of our inner world. We live in a profoundly mysterious world, full of coincidences and synchronicities. The more of us who are aware of this mystery, the more we can create a whole new vision of life. We will redefine the universe as energetic and sacred. We'll discover that everything around us and all matter comes from divine energy. Seen from this angle, we can see that humans have always felt uncertain and disconnected from this sacred source, and this is why they need to dominate others. This battle is responsible for all human conflict. Our only solution is to cultivate a personal reconnection with the divine and achieve a mystical transformation that fills us with unlimited energy and love, expanding our perception of beauty. This reconnection with divine grace leads us to a greater awareness of our higher self and frees us from the mental patterns, fear, jealousy, envy, anger, resentment, etc., that control us. In this way, we discover a specific truth, a mission that we must share. It's why we are here on Earth. It's the ultimate goal of our evolution. To spread consciousness. In this way, we enable humanity to evolve towards this other level of consciousness and this new reality. Through this mission, our inner intuition guides our steps, showing us where to go and what to do. If we make only positive interpretations of all the synchronicities, then we provoke a series of coincidences that open the doors to our life mission. When enough of us enter this evolutionary movement of consciousness, giving ever more energy to the higher self of each person we meet, we will become the creators of a new culture. Our physical bodies will evolve towards even higher levels of perception and energy. In this way, we participate in the long march of human evolution, from the Big Bang to life's ultimate goal, to energize our bodies generation after generation, until we finally perceive paradise within ourselves and on Earth. Time is merely the linear representation of the evolution of everything. As the French chemist, philosopher and economist Lavoisier put it, nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything is transformed. In other words, the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras said that nothing is born and perishes, but things that already exist combine, then separate again. Everything is one. We are not a child, then a teenager, then an adult, then an old man, but a child who begins a cycle of physical growth to give way to a cycle of spiritual growth. The spirit of the child we once were is accompanying us throughout our lives. That's what we need to nurture it like a plant. We need light to blossom and grow stronger. We need to nourish and comfort the soul of our inner child. Many of us forget or ignore this, and it's often the reason why we fall into dark, sad, depressive and meaningless periods. It's important to cultivate our individual well-being in order to amplify it on the scale of the whole. Unity is in ancity, and ancity is in unity. We are in the whole, and the whole is in us. Understanding this allows us to cultivate not only our compassion, but also our well-being, since we understand that we influence everything outside ourselves. The universe is random and unpredictable, made up of colliding particles in perpetual motion, and within this infinitely vast universe lies space, matter, energy, our spirit, and our physical body. In fact, we are talking about a physical body, since it's made up of matter. The latest studies in quantum science explain that a DNA cell oscillates according to the waves and vibratory frequencies emitted by the emotions of the body from which it is extracted. If this same body is moved 550 kilometers away, the DNA cell oscillates in exactly the same way as when it was next to the body. This means that geographical distance does not interfere with the reception of waves between a DNA cell and a physical body. Similarly, science has proven that DNA cells are mimetic, reproducing the vibrations of their surroundings. This means that your DNA cells pick up the vibrations of someone passing by and imitate their frequency. In other words, negative energy and bad moods are contagious. Our DNA cells reproduce the environment, and the environment shapes our DNA. A new science has emerged, epigenetics. In contrast to conventional science, epigenetics teaches us that our genes change according to our environment. So, to transform our personality, we need to modify our environment. Classical science, on the other hand, tells us that genes cannot be modified, leading to the deduction of psychological family karma. My family is like that, so am I. If we are sensitive to the vibratory movements of the environment around us, then we can deduce that for the outside world to change around us, we must influence it. Our personal change is the basis of all external change. I won't go any further into these metaphysical and quantum explanations in this book, as it's not yet an area I've mastered sufficiently due to its complexity. But as I study neuroscience to cure myself of the bipolarity and schizophrenic tendencies from which I suffered, I'm simultaneously led to read about quantum science, epigenetics, and metaphysical thinking. Spirituality is another, less rational branch, but it also leads to notions of the quantum, since spirituality extends its domain to the belief in an invisible world. This invisible world is the quantum field. Our thoughts shape our reality, because the subconscious has the power to transform matter. Metaphysics, quantum, and neuroscience are rational sciences, but they all converge on the notion of spirituality. Yet even in its rationality, quantum science leads us to the fact that paradigm, reality, shifts are possible. It's our power to transform our inner world. It's our capacity for transformation. It's an alchemy of emotions that makes magic seem possible. We are the creators of our lives. We can do whatever we want. In other words, we can do whatever we dream of. We are far more powerful than we can ever imagine. Just think of the 90% of our brain that we're not yet using, and we can begin to imagine that we're worth far more than we could ever dream of before. We are much more than what we are. We are, and simply by being, our potential is immense. This ancient from which we are extracted is the tree of possibilities for our individual realization on a planetary scale. We are, and simply by being, we participate in the creation of this gigantic and cosmic work. In the book Meditating for Everyday Life, 1990, by the Venerable Henepola Gunaratana, a Buddhist monk since the age of 12, we learned that in the last century, Western physics made a surprising discovery. The very process of observation changes the object we observe. For example, an electron, an extremely small element, cannot be seen without instruments, and the apparatus influences what the observer sees. If an electron is observed in one way, it appears to be a particle, a hard little ball bouncing back and forth on nice straight paths. If observed in another way, it appears to be a wave with nothing solid about it. It gleams and shakes all over the field, and the observer participates in this effect by the very fact of observing it, with no way of avoiding the interaction. Greg Braden, a former computer geologist, now travels to remote monasteries to study forgotten sacred texts and reveal their eternal secrets. His work has been featured on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, and NBC, and his books have been translated into 17 languages in 33 countries. He is internationally recognized as a pioneer of the links between science and spirituality. If I'm not mistaken, it was in one of his books, The Divine Matrix, that I first learned that the very process of observation changes the object we're observing. It's consciousness that enables this change. The concepts of entity and unity are linked. They don't exist without each other, just as consciousness does not exist without the observer. When we understand that we give life to every material object around us, then we understand that we are part of a universal cosmic whole. It's our consciousness that allows matter to be recognized as such. This may seem a strange idea, but think about it. Let's take a simple example, an animal. Let's say you have the ability to make yourself invisible. An animal won't respond to your commands if it can't see you. It will go about its life without even knowing you exist. But if you become visible again, by your simple reappearance, the animal will be able to perceive senses that were inactive when you were invisible. Smell, sight, touch, hearing, and perhaps even taste if it licks or bites you. With this example, it's now easier for you to extend this idea to the stars, wind, rain, and everything else. Everything is present because we allow it to be. Without it, we'd be in a space-time before the Big Bang. That would be nothingness. The nothingness that has become the whole is visible only to the eyes of consciousness. It's our consciousness that enables the reality that surrounds us. Just as we enable matter to exist, we also have the power to transform it. We come from creation, and so in this sense, we have the power to create. We give life to things through the power of our consciousness, and we also transform things through the power of our consciousness. This possibility of transformation operates in a world invisible to the eye, the quantum field, the field of all possibilities. I won't go into more detail on the notion of the quantum in this book, but one thing is clear to me, as I've experienced it for myself. As the quantum sciences explain, we really do have the possibility of acting on our world by transforming our way of thinking. This ancient of which Buddhism speaks leads to personal transformation by adding compassion for the whole to the liberating concept of the individual. This opens up the possibility of linking the spiritual with the scientific. You have to experience it to really understand it. Wanting to become truly happy eventually leads to Eastern spirituality, including Buddhism. By exploring this unknown, we get to know ourselves and rebuild ourselves. We understand that we can choose who we want to become, and our transformation becomes possible. In this way, we discover altruistic values, forgiveness, compassion, respect, etc., that allow us to heal and liberate ourselves individually while having an impact on a global scale. Be the change you want to see in the world. Gandhi. Part 3. Impermanence. Impermanence is a concept I also discovered through the wisdom of Buddhism. If I hadn't been interested in the pursuit of happiness, I'd never have understood or even become aware of this reality. It's quite simple. To support the impermanence of an example, I'll quote Thich Nhat Hanh, the militant Vietnamese Buddhist monk nominated by Martin Luther King for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1967. He introduces us to the values of Buddhism through his 100 published works, translated into several languages and lectures around the world. A political refugee in France since 1972, he set up the Premier Village Buddhist Center in 1982. He passed away on January 22, 2022. Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings introduce us to the fundamental values of Buddhism. They enable all those who decide to be happy to free themselves from identification with the concept of birth and death. According to Buddhist wisdom, this is the main cause of human suffering. When we understand the impermanence of all things, we are freed from the cycle of suffering linked to the notion of birth and death. Humanity is suffering, and one of the causes of this suffering is our erroneous perception of reality. What we accept as true most of the time is completely different from the truth. In these misperceptions, believing that no longer seeing something or someone with our eyes means that this something or someone no longer exists is a misperception. It's like mistaking a garden hose for a snake. We scare ourselves to the point of cardiac arrest, only to realize a few seconds later that what we thought was a snake turns out to be a garden hose. We've scared ourselves needlessly. It's exactly the same with the idea of death. Just because something or someone disappears from our view does not mean their existence is over. Let's take the example of the flower with which Thich Nhat Hanh often compared impermanence. For a flower to open, It needs certain elements to come together, such as sufficient water, heat, earth, etc. When all these elements are present, the flower that was previously invisible to our eye finally becomes present to us. When all the elements are present, the flower that was previously invisible to our eye finally becomes present to our consciousness. Its manifestation is possible because the conditions necessary for its appearance have appeared at a certain point in time. The conditions are both spatial and temporal, since the same flower will not come into being under exactly the same conditions – soil, fertilizer, heat, water, etc. – except for the season. The same flower won't bloom if the temporal condition is eliminated and we try to make it bloom in winter, for example. Simply ignoring time calls into question the whole cycle of space, since in winter there won't be as much heat as in spring and there may be too much water. So, as you can see, all conditions must be met for the event to take place. It's exactly the same for humans. We are cycles, we are an integral part of nature, even if most people living in cities are cut off from it. That's why our society is so dramatically out of balance, because we're disconnected from nature. And through this separation between ourselves and the natural environment around us, we've lost touch with the notion of impermanence as inherent to all life. We see and observe the impermanence of nature through the seasons and cycles, but we don't integrate with it. We don't understand that the impermanence of nature that operates through the cycle of the seasons is exactly the same for us in birth and death. How could the leaves on a tree die in autumn and be reborn at the start of spring without us being able to do the same? Our cycle is just a few years longer between our birth and our death. It's only the death of our physical body, just as the leaf dies in autumn. But there is a continuity, which means that behind this death, a rebirth in another form takes place. The leaf does not die, it gives way to dust and returns to the earth. Impermanence is thus linked to the idea of reincarnation. The flower dies and mixes with the earth to make fertilizer. This fertilizer then helps the corn to grow, and the corn eventually ends up in the human stomach, giving it energy and the ability to grow. Understanding this is fundamental to freeing ourselves from the belief that things die and disappear. The flower that withers and turns to dust is no longer visible to our eyes, but it eventually ends up as corn in our stomachs thanks to the intervention of other elements. Then we go to the toilet, and once again the corn we've digested mixes with earth and water, evaporating to form the clouds that give rise to rain. The rain in turn will water the earth, which when conditions are right again will enable a flower to appear, and so on. It's exactly the same for us. When we disappear, it's because the conditions necessary for our life are no longer present. We lack energy, vitality and strength, and eventually we wither. But this process is accelerated by the fact that we don't nourish our life force sufficiently. A tragedy struck my life. My brother committed suicide. I wanted to keep some of his ashes before scattering them. I saw that they were made up of small pebbles and grains of sand. It was a strange sensation, like seeing the universe. I had the feeling that my brother had only been an illusion, a mirage. I saw in this matter creation, the cosmos, unity. I had the certainty that he was returning to where he came from the all to the one, and then back to the all, or in other words, from ancity to individuality, and then back to ancity. I felt as if I'd experienced the ultimate truth, and this gave me a feeling of profound serenity and peace. I felt no despair, fear or denial of reality. People often let themselves be devastated by the despair of death, even though it reveals immeasurable beauty. But the loss of a loved one can also leave a void if we fail to detach ourselves from our dependence on matter and accept the idea of relinquishing physical presence. Here again, understanding impermanence helps to overcome such tragedies. Most people, one death past their 40s, believe that their life is already over. They stop the regeneration process that is carried out by the telomeres, the DNA ends responsible for regeneration. When the telomeres no longer receive the information linked to the desire to create, learn, etc., the regeneration process stops, and so we age. We are afraid of death because we don't live until we die. We know this deep down inside, but fears and false beliefs prevent us from living life to the full and realizing our dreams. We think it's too late, that we're already too old, etc., and finally we resign ourselves and give up without even trying. We need escapes from this self-imposed over-adaptation to the idea of being an adult. People believe that being an adult means putting on a tie, a suit, heels, having children, a house, a car, and a job that fulfills material expectations. We work to pay for these false needs, and in the end, we never have time for ourselves to enjoy all these material possessions. Vital needs, eating, sleeping, breathing, etc., must be satisfied if we are to live. If we stop feeding these needs, we'll simply die. Imagine stopping breathing. Well, you may never have paid attention to your breathing. You may not even know how to breathe. Please check. Put your hand on your belly and pay attention. Inhale and exhale sharply, not the movement of your belly. Make sure you inhale by inflating your belly and exhale by deflating it. It's like blowing up a balloon. It fills with air and becomes large, inhalation, then deflates and becomes small again, exhalation. Chances are that you do the opposite, as I did, until I discovered yoga and meditation, which are essentially about breathing. Do it again. Breathe deeply and watch the movement of your belly. You may be one of the vast majority of people who don't know how to breathe. Practicing this new awareness of the movement of our belly helps us to better understand the impermanence of the breathing cycle. Inhale follows exhale, then inhale, then exhale, and so on. Breathing is vital, yet few people give it the attention it needs to harmonize body and mind. For 1 week, observe your breathing and correct it until it becomes a natural and correct automatism. Be self-disciplined for the next 7 days. You need to do this breathing exercise at least 10 times a day. If you don't correct yourself, you'll continue to fail to give your body the conditions it needs to function properly. Breathing is vital, and you must breathe correctly. If the conditions necessary for your blossoming, your well-being, your harmony are not all present, like the flower, you won't be able to manifest your full potential. It's logical and natural, so don't go against nature. Impermanence is also reflected in the way we eat. Food is what gives us energy. We are what we eat. I once read this phrase: tell me what you eat and I'll tell you who you are. If we don't eat properly, we disrupt our biological system cycle of impermanence and remain constipated. For example, when we should already have expelled the digested food. So we slow down the process of fertilizing the earth to allow the flower to manifest itself. then wither and fertilize the earth again so that the corn can manifest itself before ending up in our stomachs and so on. If we are bloated and constipated, we are slowing down the natural cycle of the impermanence of everything, of the whole, of entity. Just as it's important to brush our teeth twice a day to maintain oral hygiene, it's also vital to maintain mental hygiene. Meditating twice a day, if possible in the morning when we wake up, and in the evening before we go to sleep or to go to sleep, keeps our mind clear and our energy at a positive vibratory frequency. Part 4. Cultivating compassion. How can we not sink into despair when we see all that's going on in the world? It's high time we joined the forces and worked individually to open up the field of human consciousness. By practicing compassionate and benevolent meditation, we influence our behavior and deeds, thus influencing social problems, as our energy is better channeled to focus on them. It's difficult to conceive of a better society if we don't individually fill our hearts with compassion. Compassion is a value that many of us have lost. We've been programmed to compete, and that includes a notion of ruthlessness, or an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Everyone has their own problems. On an individual level, daily worries overwhelm us and prevent us from helping our fellow man. We are so focused on making ends meet or sorting out our intimate relationships that getting really involved in other people's stories have become difficult. For lack of time, we become insensitive, with the exception of hypersensitive people whose empathy is one of the qualities they suffer from. So many people need help, and there are a growing number of causes to support, that we suffer in the face of all these injustices if our degree of sensitivity is high. We really have to build up a shell of ourselves to be able to withstand the uglier side of the reality in which the societal system forces us to live. So much so that, in the end, we protect ourselves so much that we become selfish. We have developed too many fears in the course of our lives that prevent us from expressing our compassion. We've had to armor ourselves to face the reality of life. This armoring is symbolic of the bunkers of war. We've learned to barricade our hearts. Humanity is stuck in fear. It's really up to each of us to work individually to free ourselves from all these blockages. Then we can live a fully harmonious life. On the other hand, helping out financially is complicated for many of us. We are afraid of running out of money at the end of the month once all the bills have been paid. So how can we help a homeless person? We think they can get help from the local authorities, for example, so we don't give it. What's more, there are a lot of embezzlement scams being run on the backs of charities. So we say to ourselves, that's it, I'm not giving anymore. And finally, because of all these fears, manipulations, lies, corruption, etc., our hearts have become close to the problems around us. What's more, we need to force the national education system to adapt the school curriculum to our spiritual evolution. In this way, we can give our children, from the earliest age, an education based on the values of conscience, compassion, respect, tolerance, true equality, fraternity, and freedom. Research has shown that when a change occurs in a system or species in one part of the world, it affects similar systems and species in any other part of the world. This is the theory of the 100th monkey. It refers to the phenomenon that occurs when learning or behavior spreads for a small group of individuals to an entire population once a minimum number of individuals has been reached, critical mass. The adoption of new behaviors by a minority can spread exponentially once the critical mass has been reached. 99 monkeys have changed their behavior, but evolution stagnates until the additional energy of 100th monkey creates a kind of momentum, influencing all the others to adopt the same behavior. In other words, the more of us who take the spiritual path, the more quickly others will emerge from their ignorance and follow the expansion of consciousness. Evolution is transmissible. The more we realize that we must respect ourselves and the planet, the more the consciousness of the collective mass will grow, and the more speed society will acquire on its way to enlightenment. Each and every one of us is part of the acceleration of evolution towards a better world. This concept was also developed by Lao Tzu in his theory of the butterfly. The idea is that the flap of a butterfly's wings can cause a tsunami on the other side of the world. Lao Tzu was a Chinese sage, a contemporary of Confucius and considered a posteriori to be the founding father of Taoism, one of the three pillars of Chinese thought alongside Confucianism and Buddhism. Taoism is based on the existence of a principle at the origin of all things, called Tao. Pierre Rabhi, a farmer, writer and thinker, who was a man on a lifelong journey towards greater solidarity, fraternity and humanism, who died in 2021, was fond of quoting the Amerindian legend of the hummingbird. One day, says the legend, there was a huge forest fire. All the animals, terrified and dismayed, watched helplessly as the disaster unfolded. Only the little hummingbird was active, fetching a few drops with its beak to throw on the fire. After a while, the armadillo, annoyed by this ridiculous agitation, said to him, "Hummingbird, are you crazy? You're not going to put out the fire with those drops of water." And the hummingbird replied, "I know that, but I'm doing my bit." This legend sheds light on the importance of individual action. We have an impact on a larger scale, rather than doing nothing in the face of current environmental, social or economic problems because we feel powerless or think that the solution must come from others. We can act with our skills on our own scale. And if our individual action seems derisory, it's thanks to the sum of the hummingbirds that things are changing on a planetary scale. Be the change you want to see in the world. The Dalai Lama said, "If the merit of man is no longer favored, contention no longer penetrates the common people. If precious goods are no longer sought, theft disappears from the minds of the people. If what arouses desire is no longer displayed, the trouble in the hearts of the people is removed. Thus, to govern the people, the wise man empties the conscience but fills the belly, weakens the will but strengthens the bone. He keeps the people free of science and desire and ensures that skill dare not manipulate. By the virtue of non-action, order is maintained naturally. It is thanks to compassion that we are born with the will to do the personal work necessary for our happiness in order to have an impact on a global scale. No matter how small our personal evolution may be, it has an effect on a quantum scale, invisible but real. It acts at a certain pace on the evolution of planetary consciousness. It all depends on our individual evolution. Our lives have an impact on the rest of the world around us, and this is how we can all act together. When people become less ego-driven and more heart-centered, we'll begin to achieve a deeply spiritual society and move from a collective individual ego to a universal soul. To know our true mission on Earth, we must resolve to eliminate everything that contradicts our truth and our evolution. Self-discipline plays a very important role in our progression. Our brain is divided into two hemispheres, the left, which is linked to rationality, logic and linear thinking, and the right, which is linked to creativity, intuition and emotion. The yoga meditation do is a spiritual art that helps develop the right hemisphere. When we call upon it, we reveal our creative potential, all too often untapped in most human beings. We need to base our relationships on cooperation and love rather than competition and aggression. Our logic thus becomes multidimensional rather than linear and exclusive. We are here to reach paradise on earth, which lies within ourselves. Only we can put an end to disease, crime, poverty, war and despair. In this way, we participate in the positive, collective and global change of humanity. Sometimes we lose peace, balance, light and hope, but we must remain individually aligned with the values of compassion, forgiveness and love, so that all this only passes through us. There is indeed a state of alignment, peace, love and gentleness with who we are, with others and with life in general. A state of gentleness with what is, making us stable and balanced, is the most beautiful thing that can happen to humanity. Naturally, our collective choices and actions will be imbued with this vibration. Once this has been achieved, no one will want to go back and lose this understanding. We have enormous creative potential, but for most of us it's still far too often latent. We are here on Earth to awaken it and thus reveal our divinity. I'm the 99th monkey, and you?